Greetings. By virtue of your presence watching this video today, I want you to know that we consider you to be an extended member of our family at Unity in Linwood. We believe that you are an individualized expression of that one creative impetus which stands behind all life, and as such we celebrate the uniqueness which you are, and we celebrate our unity with you. We are glad you're with us.
Good morning, Unity in Linwood. Good morning, Unity in Linwood. Good morning, Unity in Linwood. I have to tell you yet again, this is my favorite day of the week for the privilege of being in your noble presence. I'm grateful. I'm grateful. If you would like to become a formal member of this evolving divine idea we call Unity in Linwood, this is your month. This is your month. Following this service next Sunday, I would invite you to attend an orientation experience in my office. It's called The Basics of Unity. It's followed by a new members reception in your honor on the 27th, followed by new members Sunday on the 29th. Applications are available at the welcome and information station. I'd like to introduce you to a new event that is slated for the first Friday in May. It's called Spring Swing. It's a fundraising event that has been produced by your Board of Trustees. It features the Rainbow City Band. So beginning at 6 o'clock, we will gather for heavy appetizers, followed by a swing dance lesson at 7. I will not be teaching that. Followed by an evening of swing dancing. Tickets will come available next week. Speaking of tickets, please visit the Edmonds Center for the Arts website. There you will find Unity in Linwood's proud presentation of Mary Ann Williamson's Seattle leg of a tour she's calling Love America. Tickets range from $25 to $95. There's not a bad seat in the house. But if you would like to smell her breath and see her nose hair, the $95 ticket is for you. They are very close. It was about 1,000 years after that first Easter that the idea of substitutionary sacrifice, the idea that Jesus died for human error, emerged. The first fully developed presentation was set forth in the year 1097 in a book written by the Archbishop of Canterbury. The early followers of the Way. You do understand that the term Christianity does not appear in your Christian Bible, by the way. The early followers of the Way certainly didn't recall that first Easter in such a light. Perhaps the closest reference reads, "The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." A passage better translated as payment for liberation than as payment for sin. Now, given that the preceding passages offer something of a blistering critique of the oppression and exploitation in Jesus' world, we might conclude that it was this oppression and exploitation which were the targets for said liberation. And even under threat of death, Jesus would not forego his liberating message of love amidst fear, equality amidst division, inclusion amidst separation, and especially in the end, forgiveness in the midst of unthinkable cruelty. In short, even under threat of death, his liberating message was not for sale. So in short, his death had nothing to do with your human flaws. His death had everything to do with our human potential. So we honor his ministry, not so much by gathering in certain places on certain days to perform certain rituals, but by walking love into a world which would still know fear, by walking equality into a world which would still know division, by walking inclusion into a world which would still know separation, and by walking forgiveness into a world which would still know unthinkable cruelty. Or as the poet wrote, understand that all great people who come into this world ultimately leave the same plea. It goes something like this: you were never meant to cower in my shadow, but to stand instead upon my shoulder and to reach further in your lifetime than I have been able to reach in mine. That is the real message of all great people. That is the real message of Jesus. And when we finally heed this message, his death will no longer be in vain. End quote. So maybe this alone is the gift that someone came here to receive today. If you walked in with decades of guilt because Jesus died for something that you did wrong, then let it be in this place and let it be on this day that you receive permission to let that go. In fact, this is one of the beauties of communities such as ours. Not only are you allowed to give rise to that point of tension between your soul's wisdom and your understanding of your tradition's narratives, you are encouraged to give rise to it. You are encouraged to give rise to that point of tension and specific to self and to women and to gays and beyond in the same way that your ancestors gave rise to that point of tension in specific to slavery and murder and sacrifice and beyond. You see, in the same fashion that our ancient math books and ancient history books and ancient philosophy books were intended to be points of departure into even deeper understanding, so too are our spiritual narratives intended to be points of departure into even higher revelation. God is not done with you yet. As Bishop John Shelby Spong reminds us, while humanity has spent the past 2,000 years looking backward and entertaining the idea that the divine can become human, humanity must spend the next 2,000 years looking forward and exploring the idea that the human can become divine. Or as I like to say it, while humanity has spent the past 2,000 years building steeples reaching outward to transcendent gods on high, humanity must spend the next 2,000 years turning those steeples upside down, pointing inward that humanity might be reminded instead of an immanent God, which would be recognized not on high, but in the sanctuary of each human heart and realized through the activities of every human hand. So we'll begin our time together this morning by doing just that. We'll begin our time together this morning by turning inward. By turning inward to that immanent one, which would be recognized in the sanctuary of our human heart. So let's take a deep breath together. And let's close our outer eyes to that world of partial truth. And let's turn our attention to the immanent, unlimited one. So yet again this year in our Easter narrative, we arrive at a point at which we are confronted with our loyalties. Our loyalties to facts or our loyalties to truths. Again, prior to the Enlightenment, the truths of a tale were never perceived to be dependent upon the facts of a tale. In other words, it was well understood that 40 would have meant something beyond 40. That regaining sight would have meant something beyond regaining sight. That getting a haircut would have meant something beyond getting a haircut. So while this modern loyalty to facts might stomp its feet and demand, was there really a good Samaritan who rescued a man? And was there really a wayward son who returned to his father? Was there really a whale and a giant and an ark and a leper and 7 horses? And can women really turn into salt? Our loyalty to truth stands in resolve and answers, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. For you see, our loyalty to truth understands that the spiritual value of these tales is neither inflated nor deflated by their factuality. So while Easter is a singular story about the life Jesus lived, an event which can be celebrated by many, I would offer Easter as a universal and deeply true story about the life of humanity. That's a story that all of us can share. Shall we hear it again? Yes. Take a deep breath. As you already know, 2 processions entered Jerusalem on a warm spring afternoon in the year 30 or so. The convergence of a royal procession led by Pilate and rooted in imperial supremacy and bloody violence, and a peasant procession led by Jesus and rooted in universal equality and unconditional love inaugurated Christianity's first Holy Week in a climax to escalating tensions. The stage was set with that oppression in which the many were ruled by the few, and that exploitation in which as much as 2/3 of the wealth generated by the few went into the coffers. Generated by the many went into the coffers of the few. And a religious justification for all of it, a religious justification that went something like this: if the emperor is the Son of God, then the oppression and the exploitation must be the will of God. A theology which found all but the most courageous muttering something akin to, well, I guess this must be God's will. This was the Jerusalem into which Jesus rode in the year 30 or so. Now on Monday, Jesus cursed the fig tree. He drove the buyers and sellers from the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers while saying, "Is it not written, my house is to be a house of prayer for all the nations?" On Tuesday, Jesus offered an ongoing demonstration of trap and escape and counterattack through a series of really smart, extremely public exchanges with authority. Should we pay taxes to Caesar, came the question, to which Jesus' yes would have alienated his peasant audience, but his no would have legitimized his persecutors. So there's the attack. And Jesus responded, well, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. And there's the escape, for you see, it was understood by Jesus and many of his contemporaries that everything belonged to God. So should we pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus effectively answered, Caesar should get everything that Caesar deserves, which is nothing. And there's the counterattack. In response to further questioning, he extended the great commandment comprised of 2 passages drawn from Hebrew Scriptures. You understand that was the Bible. Jesus knew the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He told a couple parables, and the crowds were deeply moved by his messages. You see, that first century Jews rejected Jesus as an inaccurate conclusion. They were so moved by his messages that the authorities sought to arrest him privately. I mean, if they arrested him publicly, riots were certain. If they waited until the conclusion of the festival, he would be gone. So they sought to arrest him privately because that was the only viable option they had. Now, on Wednesday, an unnamed woman anointed his body for burial by pouring the expensive ointment over his head and received a stunning accolade when of her he said, "Truly, I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." For among all who had heard the prophecies of his death and resurrection, you see, she was the first one who believed him. So she is, for Mark, the first believer. For still more, she's the first Christian. Thursday is marked by the Last Supper, prayers in Gethsemane, Peter's 3 denials, the arrest, the interrogation, and the condemnation. On Friday, Jesus was delivered to Pilate's soldiers. He was tortured, humiliated. He underwent a mock coronation in which they clothed him in a purple cloak and crowned him with thorns. He was crucified, a form of public terrorism reserved for those who deny imperial authority, and buried. Now, until this moment, the story of Jesus might have slipped into anonymity, along with those of countless other Jews crucified by the Roman Empire. But from Sunday's account, we read, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb?" And when they looked up, they saw that the stone had already been rolled away. And from that moment, the story of Jesus established its firm place in history. That's our story. Now, I deeply appreciate the symbolism of the cross. Counter to this attitude in positive spirituality that if I could just get it right, I would never experience another trial, that if I could just pray enough, pray correctly, think properly, life would show up exactly as I have deemed that it should, that if I could just amass enough spiritual power, people and circumstances would happily read the scripts of infinite earthly pleasure I've written for them, that my horizon would be dotted with rainbows and pink unicorns for as far as the eye could see. Counter to this attitude, the richness of the cross is that it's a symbol of our humanity and our divinity together. It's a symbol of our finite self and our infinite self together. It's a symbol of our enslavement and our emancipation together. Unity's Daily Word spoke to this richness, and I quote, "You can't get to resurrection without crucifixion." Pretty counterintuitive for our unapologetically positive culture, don't you think? And yet I think it's true. I have to wonder if Eckhart Tolle reflected the same idea when he wrote, and I quote, "Awakening honors and welcomes pain for that which it is, the self, conscious in the form of grace, beckoning us to abandon our limitations and to return home to boundless joy, peace, and happiness. The greatest image of that is the crucifixion, a deep symbol of a truth that perhaps at that time could not be expressed in any other way. So counter to that attitude and positive spirituality, the message of the Holy Week isn't that with God we can avoid the betrayals and the crucifixions. The message of Holy Week is that with God, the betrayals and the crucifixions can lift us into higher versions of ourselves. The message of Holy Week is that Palm Sunday's commitment, followed by Thursday's betrayal, followed by Friday's crucifixion, followed by this morning's resurrection, comprise a tale common to every human soul. And that while I can't predict every nuance of that tale, what I can tell you is that to commit deeply to a higher possibility will subject you to the accusations of the visionless and to the betrayals of the common. To commit deeply to a higher possibility will demand that you symbolically die to any tired old consciousness, to any tired old ways of being. But in so doing, the stones which would stand between you and your glorious new beginning will roll away. And a glorious new life, a resurrection of sorts, will sweep in to greet you. Yet another tale of triumph on your eternal journey of soul growth, development, and unfoldment. To return to Unity's daily word, the story of Easter is about overcoming. It doesn't say the story of Easter is about ease. It says the story of Easter is about overcoming. This Easter Sunday, we rise like the sun over the horizon to a new day and a new life, free and unencumbered. From the top of the hill, from our higher consciousness, our hearts sing, hallelujah, hallelujah, and we rejoice. End quote. So traditional Christianity likes to say Christ is risen, and I wouldn't disagree. For in every moment of overcoming, both individual and collective, in every moment that we're willing to walk beyond these doors into a world which would still know fear, I'm willing to say Christ is risen indeed. In every moment that we're willing to walk equality into a world which would still know division, I am willing to say Christ is risen indeed. In every moment that we are willing to walk inclusion into a world that would still know separation, to walk forgiveness into a world that would still know unthinkable cruelty, I am indeed willing to say Christ is risen indeed. Christ is risen indeed. Christ is risen indeed.
life. Am I wise enough to make the right decisions when I'm standing in the fork of the road? Sometimes I wonder and ponder, only to realize I'm not alone and there's nothing I have to do on my own, because I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. Will I have enough to do the things I need to do to take care of myself? Will I have the health of mind and body to live a life of grace and wholeness? Sometimes I wonder and ponder, only to realize I'm not alone and there's nothing I have to do on my own, because I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. Woo! I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. I am, you are, we are. Oh, yeah. I am, you are, we are. Shows up where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. I am, you are, we are. I am, you are, we are. I am, you are, we are. I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. Come on, y'all, work it, work it. Come on, say it like you mean it. I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up. I am the place where God lives, moves and breathes and has its being. I am the place where God shows up.
Thanks again for joining us. Please visit unityinlinwood.org for a preview of all upcoming classes, services, and events, and for an opportunity to make a gift to our community should you so choose. Thank you.